So recently, as I was playing Honkai Star Rail across my two accounts, something has been bothering. On my second account, I often use Dr. Ratio or even Motsa as my third slot for my Ashblade team. Yet on my main account, I rarely use Dr. Ratio or even my Fei Xiao, even though I have Topaz as my alternative. So what gives? Even though I tried using trial units of Mortag's Blade or Ashville on the main account for Ratio and Fei Xiao when doing something like Divergent Universe, Topaz as the third slot didn't perform equally. In this video, I'll be talking about Topaz, her gameplay, what her role is, what caused her initial rise, but then her eventual fall to inevitably getting replaced. If you want more of these kinds of videos, comment down below and subscribe to the channel. Topaz is a Fire Hunt character, with her main gameplay is acting as the team's sub-DPS, specifically in follow-up attack teams. She allows this by marking one enemy with proof of death, increasing damage the marked enemy takes from all follow-up attacks, and having her summon Numbi launch himself as a follow-up attack to deal damage to the marked enemy. Finally, Topaz's ult allows Numbi to get enhanced to deal more damage. When she first came out back in 1.4, the meta was dominated by the three, but mainly two very powerful destruction hypercarries of Dunhong and Byron Name and Jingliu, with being able to deal high damage to one enemy and its adjacent targets. Compared to Topaz, being a single target unit was already a negative since players envisioned in the best 5 target scenario, if you weren't named Zila, then it would have taken you 4 attacks to kill the 4 smaller mobs before you even get to the boss. Meanwhile, destruction units could deal damage to the boss whilst eliminating the smaller mobs to the side, granting maximum efficiency since they only need 2 attacks to deal with all 4 smaller mobs, whilst being able to deal majority of their damage to the boss. Topaz was in a worst case scenario since majority of her damage came from Numbi's follow-up attack, which already had low damage multipliers from the start. But Topaz believers, like me, saw her similar to Kafka, where she enabled the archetype and only needed more time to grow. She got her first major break after the release of 1.6, with Dr. Ratio coming out, being the first follow-up attack DPS. Dr. Ratio paired with Topaz allowed each other to constantly launch a barrage of follow-up attack to enemies, which circumvented the initial problem when it comes to 5 target scenarios, being able to wipe out the 4 smaller mobs with 4 follow-up attacks to then switch the focus to the boss. The follow-up archetype then kept growing after the release of Aventurine and Robin, completing the first full follow-up attack-centric team, with everyone contributing in some way. Then 2.5 came out with the release of Fei Xiao, being another follow-up attack DPS replacing Dr. Ratio, but also releasing the 4-star character Motsa and March 7's Hunt Pass. Fei Xiao and Motsa and even Hunt 7 was more synergistic with each other since they could launch their follow-up attacks not only more often, but also in between character and enemy turns, compared to Numbi, who was a summon, thus having to take an action. 3.x and the entire Emporius arc didn't introduce any addition to the follow-up attack archetype, leaving the archetype as a whole in the dust. That's until patch 4.1, where they introduced Ashville, a lightning hunt unit who was both a follow-up attack DPS and sub-DPS. From their kits alone, he essentially did all she was good at, but better. His personal damage was higher, his buffing capability was better, and his follow-up attack frequency was much faster. Then patch 4.3 came out with Mortag's Blade, which is a fire nihility unit who worked as a general debuffer, being able to increase the team's damage while also reducing the enemy defenses, but he also excelled at attacking frequently with his own follow-up attack. This resulted to creating one of the most powerful duos in Star Rail as of now, called Ashblade, being able to constantly launch attacks and barraging enemies down. Sound familiar? This effectively cemented Topaz's complete disappearance from the meta, not only since her role was overshadowed and being outdone in everything by Ashvale, but her follow-up attacks were ironically slow. Where most follow-up attacks nowadays take in turn as an extra turn, Numbi has to take a turn. Here's a visual example of what I mean when it comes to speed of the follow-up attack, and take a look at specifically at the action bar on the top left.
My job is to push you through you. Get them! Fight to the death! Don't show! I time to kill. Cannot hide! Fight to the death! Answer me! Zero waste! Don't show! Time to kill. Cannot hide! Don't show!
As you can see on one team, all the follow-up attacks being launched were immediately happening, where Numbi has to take action first to continue this chain reaction. To some, this might not be that much of an issue since it results to almost the exact same thing. However, bear in mind Numbi is a summon, Numbi gets action advance when the enemy with proof of death gets hit with a follow-up attack. But if Numbi is already at the top of the action bar, then all that action advance is practically gone to waste, resulting into the chain reaction getting delayed, ending up dealing the damage in a much wider window. She essentially lost her main purpose in the follow-up attack team, to the point that in specific scenarios, Moza, March Hunt 7, Chibi, and Cypher were better alternatives at equal investments. So, how can Hoyo fix Topaz as a unit? Well, that we can't tell since Novaflare seems to be sporadic. So instead, here's my idea on the Topaz Novaflare. First, I think Numbi shouldn't be a summon anymore, but instead changed into a resource, where if an ally launches a follow-up attack to the enemy marked with proof of death, she gains a point of Numbi, and at 4, Topaz launches Numbi as a follow-up attack. But the main thing I think would be interesting is how she can buff her other follow-up attack allies. Sure, they can give her the usual damage bonus, defense shred, all-type res pen, etc., but I had a more interesting idea. For this idea, Topaz will gain a new resource called Interest, where she gains it after she launches her follow-up attack or after using her ultimate. This will allow her to do something similar to a Sarijo, where if she has Interest, she can allow an ally that recently just used their follow-up attack to immediately use it again. Here's a visual example. First, Dr. Ratio uses a skill, resulting to him using his follow-up attack.
0 points.
Then Topaz allows him to use it again with the cost of consuming a point of interest, and this follow-up attack will do more damage than the previous one.
0 points.
Finally, they can give her ultimate a standard buff like defense ignore to all allies, and also reduce the amount of Numbi points that Topaz would need to use her follow-up attack. I think these changes can allow Topaz to have a much faster follow-up attack and be able to synergize with the other follow-up attack units while having her own identity. That's it for this video. I wanted to make this video as my first big work project video since it's the first time I use my voice on a video. I also wanted to make it since I love Topaz and I'm kinda sad that I barely get to use her anymore, especially on endgame content due to just how weak she is. I actually like and enjoy making concept ideas for character Novaflares in the background, so if you want more of them, let me know. See ya!